Hello everybody, welcome to Virtual Vacation. We're going to be starting out with a tour of Boston, just like you'd get on a duck boat. And we're going to start here at the Customs House. It was kind of fascinating. This is the Rose Kennedy Greenway, and beside us are all buildings that we'll see. And the ships used to come in and drop off their cargo right here at the Customs House. The front of the ships almost would touch the building. That's how close they would get. Like I said, this is going to be a narrated tour, so hold on. The Customs House is now condos and offices and what have you. The Rose Kennedy Greenway, which I mentioned earlier, every little section was given to a different engineer, and they came up with different types of green spaces and how it would be used. Off to our right, we'll see the New England Aquarium, and off in the distance, you could almost make out Logan International Airport. Okay, here we go. Coming up on Faneuil Hall. Faneuil Hall, we'll see that further on in the tour, but it was about 1742 when the richest merchant in Boston actually gave the city of Boston Faneuil Hall the building, which would become the cradle of liberty. You can see what I mean here about the Rose Kennedy Greenway. Here's another area of it that's sort of like a carnival atmosphere. It has carousels and different things, so forth. Okay, on our right again, we see Christopher Columbus Park. We're coming into the north end of Boston, and we can see Christopher Columbus off in the distance. It's a beautiful park, and Christopher Columbus, as we know, is credited with discovering this great country of ours, but as far as we know, he never actually did discover Boston or make it into Boston Harbor. As we go along, you got to remember all of these buildings were at one point just the ocean. Now there's restaurants and multi-million-dollar condos in front of us. Each one of those condos has their own boat slip, and they're approximately $1.2 million per condo. And you can look to our right. Everything now is bike friendly in Boston. And this is Lewis Wharf area. If you look to the right, you'll see what I mean about the boat slips, and each person has their own private parking for their boats if they would like. We're now coming up to the heart of the north end of Boston. Out to our left, you'll see a lot of these do not enter streets and so forth. Up in that area is where Paul Revere actually had his house. You can still go and visit the Paul Revere home. Paul Revere was a unique fella. He was married to his first wife, had 8 children, and then in childbirth, his wife died with their 8th child, and Paul Revere himself was very down over the fact that his wife died. Within a year, he was remarried and started having another 8 children. This is the area Paul Revere had, and his foundry, where he did all his silversmithing and so forth, is going to be coming up in just a matter of seconds. You can't see it, but this is the area that it was located. Okay, as you can see, we're near the United States Coast Guard station, and we're also near one of the fabled areas of one of the worst tragedies that actually happened in Boston. And this building, the Coast Guard station, originally it was all wood, but this incident that happened rocked this area so bad that it actually took and lifted the Coast Guard station right off of its foundation. Looking back to our left, off to the distance, we can see the steeple of the Old North Church. Back in 1775, the church sexton, Robert Newman, was living with his mom not too far from here. And Paul Revere asked if Robert Newman could do him a favor and place some lanterns in the steeple of the Old North Church. Well, this isn't as easy as it sounds, because of the Quartering Act. There were British troops living in the home of Robert Newman and his mom. So he had to go upstairs, sneak out a window, slide down the drain pipe, run to the Old North Church, run up to the steeple, place the infamous 2 lanterns, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, and signal that the British were indeed about to head to Concord to go after the ammunition that they believe was stored there, that the Sons of Liberty were storing to build up for a conflict. Well, Robert Newman actually made it back down, ran back to his house, made it into his house, and the next day he was arrested. But they said to him, well, you're the only one who had keys to the building, so you had to do it. And he said, no, I let somebody else borrow them. And his name was Prescott. They went to look for Prescott, and they found out that he vanished from town, and they had no idea where he went. Way off in the distance, you can see the mast of the Constitution, which is fitting because it was on this side of the harbor that it was actually built. And in this area was the foundry of Paul Revere that made the bell that was on the Constitution. Now, unfortunately, it's not the bell that's there now. Everybody thinks it is, but it's not. Even on the tours, they tell you it is, but it's not. The bell was actually lost during the War of 1812 with the skirmish the Constitution had with the HMS Guerriere. And we will be talking about the Guerriere in just a few minutes. All right, folks, moving down just a little bit from the Coast Guard station, we see Copp's Hill. Now, Copp's Hill was pretty important for the British back in 1775, because on the top of this hill, a lot of trees there now, but on the top was a battery, and a battery is a gun emplacement. Well, this gun emplacement was pointed directly at Charlestown. Well, unfortunately, there's a construction fence off, but off in the distance, you can see there's the Constitution, and a little further over, you can see the Bunker Hill Monument, which we'll be talking about also. But that whole area is in Charlestown. Well, Copp's Hill Battery was in charge of actually attacking Charlestown, and during the skirmish at Breed's Hill, Bunker Hill, that gun emplacement actually completely demolished the city of Charlestown and burnt it entirely to the ground. You tell me when?
Yep.
Okay, in front of us, you will see the state of Massachusetts skating rink. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Coast Guard station was removed from its foundation. Now, obviously, the state skating rink didn't do it, but what was here around 1919 actually did. It was a giant molasses tub. They used to unload the molasses from the ships right next door in the harbor. You can see all the ships over there. And it was about 2.3 million gallons of molasses that was stored in that leaking tub. Now, the kids loved it because they would sneak over and run their hand under the holes that were in it and get a little bit of molasses. So, January of 1919, all of a sudden there were some people out walking about in the neighborhood, and all of a sudden the molasses tower exploded. there was a 25-foot wave of molasses going in both directions, in front and behind us. 21 people were killed, 150 injured, and the force of it was so strong it actually lifted up the Coast Guard station and removed it from its foundation. In the summer days, like a beautiful day like today, in some of the basements of these original buildings that you go in and it's really hot, the people who own these buildings say you can still smell the molasses that's inside of the walls. Well, looking back outside the left side of the tour, we see this strange brick building almost across from the skating rink, a little further down the road. A lot of people might remember Polcari's restaurant used to be down on the corner. Well, this was the site of what was once Brinks. There was a Brinks company there, and it was actually robbed. The Brinks robbery occurred in that very building. Okay, we're going to be moving on. There's a lot of construction up ahead, so we won't be able to stop. The reason this area is important is because it was on the very corner we're about to come up to that Paul Revere himself was standing when he was looking over and waiting for that signal to come out of the Old North Church. And he was standing right in this very corner when he saw the 2-lamp signal. And unfortunately, there were 4 British warships in the harbor, so Paul Revere couldn't figure out, how am I going to get across? Just about when Paul Revere was at his wit's end, one of the Sons of Liberty's girlfriend came walking up to Paul Revere saying, "Hey Paul, how you doing?" They were having their little conversation, and he said, "I need to get across," without being heard. There was a boat waiting for him, a little rowboat. She took off her petticoat. Paul Revere actually wrapped it around the oars so it wouldn't make a splashing noise, and he drove right around all of the British ships without being detected. And we'll see the area he drove right across here. If you look at the sidewalk, you'll actually see bricks in the middle of the sidewalk. If you want to go on the guided tour, you can come into Boston and get a map, and you can go on a tour. You just follow the bricks and it leads you to all the highlights of Boston. So you can see off in the distance, that is Charlestown, and that was what was fully ablaze during the Battle of Bunker Hill. All the ships and all the little boats and stuff you see now obviously weren't here, all these buildings. This was all the Boston Harbor. We're going to be coming up and taking a right, and this is going to be leading us to the Charlestown area. Right now it's all cocktail shops and fooderies. Unfortunately, most everything is shut down now because of the pandemic. Very few people out walking about. But the area itself is still beautiful. It's still nice to come to. A lot of history. As you can see in front of us, that's City Square. That is where Paul Revere actually jumped on his horse, Brown Betty, and began his ride towards Lexington and Concord. On the other side, William Dawes took the land route because Boston was actually a peninsula, and William Dawes took the land route and went out what is now Washington Street. So as we turn, you can see up the Tobin Bridge. All this area was once just nothing but ocean, the harbor. And we're going to be turning down here where the USS Constitution, the oldest commissioned ship in the world, is still active. Well, that's not entirely true. I was giving a tour, and one of the British folks on the tour informed me that the British actually had a ship that was older than the Constitution. And you could go on that, and there was a monument, and you could go and enjoy it. And it was still commissioned. And I said, well, the only difference is yours is on land and ours still floats. They didn't think it was very funny. I thought there was a lot of humor in it. Right in front of us, you'll see the Charlestown Navy Yard. This is the home of the U.S. Constitution. You can look through the fence and get a good view of the Constitution. It's open for tours usually every day. Unfortunately, not because of the epidemic. And it is actually a commissioned ship, so you could be assigned that as a Navy personnel as a duty station. Back in the day, this area was also known for making rope and chain and everything needed for ships. One of the longest buildings in Boston used to be the rope manufacturing plant that is off to our right. You can actually see part of it. It goes and goes and goes, and that's where they used to make all the hemp rope. And in front of us, you'll see again the Bunker Hill Monument, about 221 feet tall, and it's actually on Breeds Hill. Well, like I said, over on Cobb's Hill, where that battery was, they started shooting because our boys decided that it was time to have some independence. So they made some, led by Colonel Prescott, decided that they were going to hold fortification on top of what they were told to do was Bunker Hill. Well, that was too much work because it was too tall. So they decided to defend Breeds Hill. It was closer to Boston and it was less work. So they put some dirt fortifications on in there, and the British came and they were shooting, and Prescott and his men were defending, and a lot of things came out of that battle. One of the most popular sayings, because the Sons of Liberty had limited ammunition, they had to wait till the British were real close. So one of the sayings was, "Don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes," because they wanted to make sure that we didn't miss. And it was one of the biggest battles that the British lost the most officers ever, because another saying was, "Aim at the well-dressed gentleman," because in the British service, the officers told everybody what to do, and if there was no officers, everybody just turned and walked away. This park that you're looking at is the area I mentioned earlier that Paul Revere mounted his horse, Brown Betty, and he began his ride towards Lexington and Concord. Paul Revere never made it. Paul Revere, William Dawes were driving along on their horses, riding along. They met up, and they were actually captured. Paul Revere didn't escape. He was actually taken captive and was released the next day. William Dawes was making his escape. He actually jumped on a horse and started running away. This is Paul Revere Park on the right, and you will see the Zakim Bridge off in the distance, as well as the state-run locks and draws. That raises and lowers the height of the North Charles River. So anyway, back to my Paul Revere story. So Paul Revere never made the ride. William Dawes ended up getting captured, made it. But as he was fleeing across a field, his horse reared up, and he fell off his horse. Well, unfortunately, William lost his favorite pocket watch. That made him very upset. So the next day, he needed to run back and look for his pocket watch, which he did end up finding. You'll see off to our right, down low, you can see the water, and that's the lock system. to go into the up into the Charles River. So we're going to be leaving the north end. We're heading back towards Welcome to Boston. Taking a right onto Causeway Street. We're going to be heading down towards the infamous Boston Garden. Yes, everybody used to make fun of me and my accent and tell me I talk funny. Well, I had a group of Southerners one day and they said, say something funny. So I said, park the car in the Harvard Yard. They loved it, and now I guess that's funny to them. If you look off to your right, you'll see the Zakim Bridge. Now, Willie Zakim was said to be able to bridge ties between people. The bridge was named after him. It's not the longest cable stay bridge in the world, but it is indeed the widest. 4 lanes north, 4 lanes south, with an additional 2 lanes heading towards the north. All of this new building in the area you see is all coming around the Boston Garden. All new North Station hotels. You can stay over, new restaurants. There's quite a bit of construction. It's been going on for a few years in the area. So as you see in front of us is the parking and the entrance for the Boston Garden. There used to be some beautiful statues. I don't know if people remember the Bobby Orr statue of him leaping through the air when he made the infamous winning goal. Oh, there it is right there, the Bobby Orr statue. I didn't know they moved it to there. Very interesting. Coming up in front of us is what used to be the old tenement section of Boston, old tenement housing. And for anybody who is a sci-fi nerd, you'll remember the name Mr. Spock, Leonard Nimoy. He lived over here. This is where he grew up, in this section of Boston, which was all tenement housing. And let me see if we can get a picture. Coming up to our right, there's one tenement house left. They refused to take it down, and the way it's paid for now is they put banners up on the side of it. You can see that banner with people and their feet, the shoe banner, way off in the distance. That is the only tenement house left in the entire area. Everything else is all brand new construction, which it seems like it's always under construction here in Boston. Boston's West End. And we'll be circling around here. That building directly in front of you,
I know,
sorry, we have to look out the windshield, is a parking garage. Well, that parking garage was being built and it didn't pass inspection because the engineer forgot to take into account the weight of the cars when he was designing the building. So in the infinite way of Boston politics, they did a little more building. They added 2 more floors to the top, added some restaurants and office space, didn't change any of the superstructure of the building, and ended up opening it the way it was. Somehow, some way, it has not fallen to this day.